Hey there, I'm Andy Yeoh, the pastor of Generations Church. This is our podcast, and you just tuned in to the Generations on Tuesday edition. Generations on Tuesday, or GOT, is an alternative church experience. It's church, but a little different. No platform, no pulpit, no one preacher, but rather the focus is on Christ, community, and conversations. We have a special heart for those who are in the creative, arts, entertainment, media, music, F&B, and similar communities. And we want to provide a safe space to explore and discover faith in Jesus, but in a not so conventional way. We hope you'll be inspired and impacted by today's dialogue, where we keep it real, raw, and relevant on topics that matter. So let's get right into it. Be blessed.
This particular episode today is sort of a follow-up to our previous episode. I think that's episode 9, so today's 10. So previously, on episode 9, we spoke to a friend whose name is Samuel Lopez, and his story is he was born into a Christian family, grew up Christian, Baptist, Temple Christian, was a worship leader, he did all the Christian things, but after 6 years of deconstruction, he decided that he can no longer profess the faith. He doesn't consider himself a Christian today, and we talked to him in order that we may learn what actually happens when someone deconstructs, what are the questions that they ask. And so one of those questions is about the nature of God, his character. He can't seem to reconcile how can a God that claims to be loving and good either allows or does or seemingly does evil, right? So we thought it would be good to have an entire episode to talk about that, because I think that will be on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, one of the things that he also mentioned, Samuel, right? He said that he was seeking for answers.
Yes.
And I guess at the point when he was seeking, he couldn't find answers. The people that he was speaking to, and supposedly they are church pastors, elders, leaders in church, couldn't give him a good answer.
Yeah. Or even was quite dismissive.
Right.
They didn't actually even engage with the question. They just asked him to pray more or ask him to have more faith.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
So maybe this could be one episode where we try to cram all the questions in.
We'll try. I don't think this episode can cover all questions or cover all angles, but hopefully it will at least start the conversation, become a resource, maybe help point people in the right direction, something like that, right? So with us, we have Dr. Essary.
Hey.
Hello. He serves as a lecturer in biblical studies for several seminaries in Southeast Asia, but primarily with Malaysia Baptist Theological Seminary. He was a church planting pastor of Covenant Baptist Church in Malacca, and his family previously served at Gospel City Church, where he was an elder, and now serves at a new church plant called Flourish Hill, and they meet in Bukit Damansara.
That's right.
He's married to Jamie, and God has blessed them with 4 children, all starts with the letter A. Andrew, Abby, Anna, and AJ. 3 of them were born in Malaysia. So, and I have taken classes with him, and he's an Old Testament scholar, I would consider him. So we're going to talk quite a bit about the Old Testament today, because the God of the Old Testament seems pretty harsh.
Violent.
Violent. Yeah, and so we did a little poll on the Instagram. Yeah, maybe you want to take us through that.
Let's do that. So, first question that we asked on Instagram, and we engaged with our audience there. When you read about God's anger or judgment in the Bible, what do you feel? And so we actually gave them 4 options, and they choose, right? It's not an open-ended question. So the first option we gave them was, it makes me question if he's good. I see it as justice, not cruelty. The third one says, I don't really know how to feel. And the fourth one said, it's hard, but I trust he has reasons. So the popular one, which was 54%, the majority said, it's hard, but I trust that he has reasons.
That's a very Christian answer.
It's a church Instagram account.
Maybe it has something to do with it.
Which one came in second?
Second was, I don't really know how to feel.
Okay.
Like knowing that God is.
That's more honest.
You know,
Yeah.
when you read about
Full
God's
disclosure,
anger,
full
judgment,
disclosure.
yeah.
I picked that one.
Oh, me too. So we had a 27%.
So we contributed to that.
Okay, we are that number. And then the second poll that we put up, how do you personally see God? So three options.
Okay.
The first one says, loving, God is loving but firm in justice.
Okay.
The second one is harsh and hard to understand, which is quite true, by 0%.
Okay. So they all understand God, okay?
The third one is patient. God is patient and merciful, even when he's angry. So the popular choice was loving but firm in justice. Firm in.
Okay, so what is
Yeah.
different about that and the one God is patient but also judging? What was the last one?
The last one is patient and merciful, even when he's angry.
Even when he's angry.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of similar to the other.
Yeah.
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 So that one, they only had three options to choose
Yeah,
from. I
yeah,
guess
right,
it is what it
right.
is, right? So we also had a poll where it's a bit more open-ended, and we asked, if God is good, why do you think he let bad things happen? Wow. So we got a couple of answers from our crowd, right? So the first one said, the same as why God put a tree in the middle of the garden is related to his divinity. And then the other one said, because God gave everyone free will. That
Okay.
is why God permit evil. Yeah. Because they happen for good reasons, so evil happens for good reasons. Because what's bad in our eyes may not be bad in his eyes. So his ways and thoughts are higher, I guess. The last one said, I don't know. Maybe it helps our personal growth, and it's also something nice for us humans to look back at, like in hindsight. Yeah.
Wow.
So those were some responses that we get.
What would
from
you
our
have
poll.
answered, Kanesh?
What would I have answered? Let me check the question again. So if God is good, why do you think he let bad things happen? Wow, that's a deep question. We hope to answer.
But you wrote the question, right?
Yeah. So you organized a whole podcast.
Yeah.
Just the-
Yeah.
Was it me? Okay, awesome. I guess if there's no bad, we wouldn't be able to distinguish what's good. Wow, saw that.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So today's podcast is interesting because we have Dr. Carl with us, a scholar, and then we have his student here, studying masters.
One of the top students.
One of the top students.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's right.
Yes. And then we have the everyday Christian here, the consumer of church. You know, I'm a churchgoer and I live a normal life, I guess. I read Bible when I feel like reading.
Yeah.
I listen to messages from Pastor Andy
Yeah.
when I feel like listening. So I'm that product, right? So I don't know everything. I don't know a lot of things.
Okay.
I guess I ask questions that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we hope to. And I guess I'm that Samuel Lopez kind of a guy, the guy that we interviewed last week,
Yeah.
who had some form of deconstruction and asking faith-related question. So I hope to also learn one or two things today.
Yeah, and I'll come from
Yeah.
not just from a student standpoint or a pastor, just someone who have been asked these questions or have to pastor someone through it. So I'm also putting on a curious mind as to like, how do we process this and not just say pray more, have more faith. Yeah. So yeah, coming from a curious standpoint.
Awesome. Yeah.
Introduction.
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, the Bible, particularly the Old Testament. And there's some violent stuff in the New Testament also, like someone lied and dropped dead on the spot. But the Old Testament is filled with stories where God's actions or even commands sometimes seems to be harsh. He even describes himself as a jealous God. And yeah, some stories are pretty violent. So we've got stories like floods that wipes out humanity, wars commanded in his name. And you know, we know that just from doing church and meeting people, many modern readers struggle with reconciling these depictions of depictions in the Bible with the idea of a loving and merciful God. So I guess the big question generally is like, if God is truly all-knowing and all-powerful and all-benevolent, why hasn't he stopped all of this wickedness that we see in the world. And so we want to explore that tension, and we hope to bring a better understanding of God's nature and character, and try to bring some resolve to these stories we hear in the Bible. Yeah. So shall we start? Let's go.
Yeah.
When people read parts of the Old Testament, they sometimes say the God of the Bible seems just angry, and he's very jealous, very violent. How would you respond to that first impression?
Yeah, so I think I would first and foremost, if I'm just talking to somebody on the spot, I would say I understand where they're coming from. I've felt the same way. You mentioned that you've gone through a period of deconstruction in the past, and you interviewed Samuel Lopez about that as well. Whenever I was 25 years old, so about 20 years ago, I was living in China at the time, and I had some terrible things that were happening in my personal life. So I had a friend who had a brain aneurysm. My grandmother had a stroke, and there were these things that I was struggling to understand. And about that same time, I found a website that was all about debunking Christianity, right? And it sent me into a loop where I started asking all of these types of questions. And it went on, if I'm being honest, it went on for years where I was asking the questions. But there was a stretch of 6 months to a year where I'm living in China and I'm telling my wife, I'm not sure if I believe this stuff. Because it was really deep, really personal. And so, I understand why people would ask these types of questions. But one of the things that I learned as I was going through this process is these are not new questions. Mm-hmm. These are questions that have been asked for 2,000 over years for the Old Testament passages. And they are questions that people who are way more intelligent than I am have found satisfying. So it made me say, okay, if I keep pursuing the right answers, they're going to be there, right? I just got to find them. So if somebody just came up to me and they said, the God of the Old Testament seems so angry, I think I want to ask them, okay, so what are some of the passages or some of the stories that you think about that show that God seems very angry? Because I think I could also point to passages in the Old Testament that show God is very merciful, very loving.
Yeah.
Right? And so there seems to be, at least in our understanding of things, a tension there.
Yeah.
Right? God seems loving and merciful, but he also judges people and does these things. How do we resolve that? So I think the first question I would ask is, well, what are some passages that you're thinking of that might bring that to mind? So what was the
I could ask one. And this is not just me. I actually had a friend who asked me this, a non-believer.
Yeah.
And I find myself struggling to answer this. Basically, the story of okay, maybe it's not about anger, but a story about Abraham and Isaac.
Oh yeah.
Where God has asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac on a mount. Yeah, that's quite hard to come to terms with.
That really is. Yeah. Let me just open up to that really quickly. Genesis 22. Really interesting passage. If you're on a phone, you can get there much faster than I can, flipping these pages, right? So what's interesting in that story, there are a couple of things that are interesting. So the first thing, it says, very first verse, after these things, God tested Abraham. So you wonder in your mind, why does God got to put Abraham to a test?
Yeah.
And a test like this, right? But then by saying at the beginning that it put him to the test, it makes you wonder at the end if he passed the test. Have you ever thought about that? So this is a question that I have thought of as I've worked through this passage, and I've read some different scholars who've talked about it. Abraham is perfectly obedient to what God tells him to do in that moment. But God has also already promised Abraham that through Isaac, the blessing would come, right? And so it it seems like Abraham should have said, God, why are you asking me to do this?
Right.
Like, I think it would have been an appropriate, good thing for Abraham to, in a sense, speak back to God in that situation and say, why are you asking me to sacrifice my son? That's not something that you do. You're opposed to child sacrifice. All throughout the Old Testament, it tells us over and over and over again that it's wrong to sacrifice any human, but especially to sacrifice a child. Now, Abraham is faithful, and we see in Abraham's faithfulness that he ultimately knows that God is not going to go through with this. And so if you go over to Hebrews chapter 11, Hebrews chapter 11 says that he had faith that God could even raise the dead, right? That even if he does sacrifice Isaac, that God's going to raise him from the dead.
Right.
So he has this ultimate faith in God. But one of the questions that I do wonder is, did he pass the test? And should he have maybe pushed back and said, God, you don't really want me to do this, do you? And there's a couple of reasons why I think that. So notice at the beginning, he says to him, verse 2, he said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. But then notice at the end, he says to him, in verse 16, and he said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will indeed bless you. Now, what's missing in that second phrase? Notice the first phrase. He says, your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. So God responds to his obedience and says, because of your obedience, I'm going to bless you. One of your descendants is going to have victory over the gates of his enemies, all these things. But the second time through, whenever God seems to be repeating the same phrases, he doesn't say whom you love. And then if you look at the rest of the story, Isaac and Abraham kind of split up. Isaac goes to live somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Abraham goes on and lives in a different place. And so one of the things I've wondered is if God was testing, not only are you obedient to me, Abraham, but do you love your son like I want you to love your son? Mm. So I don't know. Interesting to think about. Mm-hmm. I really like that passage.
It feels like a really weird test, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't quite help being on God's side on this one. Like it feels like he's a manipulative or a jealous God. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, there's a lot of way to test someone's loyalty and faithfulness.
Yeah. So I think one way to test someone's loyalty and faithfulness is just to give them the laws and the rules and say, this is what you have to do, right? And I think another is maybe what God is doing here through giving him an opportunity to see how he'll respond, right? Now, I mean, do you have kids? No? You have kids?
Yes.
We do this sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I'll say to my kids, hey, why don't you go do that? Sometimes they'll say, no, Dad, I'm not going to do that. Come on, you don't want me to do that. I wonder if that's what Abraham was supposed to say here, right? Because I'm testing, are they truly being faithful to what I've taught them in the past? I just wonder. Now, I mean, even if that interpretation is not true, I think we still can say, okay, he was trying to see how committed and how faithful he actually is. Is he willing to even do something that seems irrational to do? A really, really, really interesting little book on this was written 200 years ago by a guy named Søren Kierkegaard, okay? He was a famous existentialist philosopher in Denmark. But he goes through And he talks about just the intrigue and the intricacy of asking somebody to do something that seems so crazy and so irrational as a way to test their faith. And he goes through different options, like what if God would have done it differently? And it turns out in the end, he comes away saying, no, the way to see how truly serious he was is like this, knowing that he's going to provide. I mean, telling the reader from the beginning, this is a test, like, don't you know?
Right, yeah.
And then also, we know from later on, even Abraham believed he's going to provide a sacrifice. He's going, even if I have to kill my son, he's going to raise him from the dead. You know, so it is interesting. It's challenging for sure.
Wow.
How do you feel?
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with the answer?
I mean, maybe not fully, but maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe what would trigger my mind is, you see, I think a lot of the language of love in the Bible, the language or what's being portrayed, right, is very New Testament-ish, right? At least it feels like that to me. And then it seemed like the Old Testament God in this context doesn't quite feel that way. Doesn't quite seem to be that way.
So are you sort of saying or implying that it feels like it's like two different gods?
It does.
It's that the Old Testament is like one God, and then there's the New Testament one.
Yeah.
But they're supposed to be the same.
Yeah,
but yet
correct.
they feel so different. So there seems to be a disconnect.
Correct, exactly.
So are they different? Or are they not? And how do we reconcile with like, no, they're not supposed to be different, they're one God, right?
So the most quoted passage in the Old Testament of another Old Testament passage is Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. Let me turn there. It's quoted directly over 20 times in the Old Testament, and it's alluded to over 100 times. And it says this. This is whenever God is speaking to Moses, revealing himself on the mountain. He says, the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed his name. The Lord, passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty, but visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Now, that is the most quoted passage in the Old Testament, and it kind of becomes their core understanding of who God is, because it's God revealing who I am. And notice the language. Yes, God is going to punish sin. It says that. But there's no comparison between punishing sin to the 3rd or 4th generation and, on the other hand, giving love to the 1,000th generation. Yes, God is just, but God, it's like the depiction that God is giving of himself is, even in the Old Testament, I skew hard to the side of mercy and compassion, slow to anger, abounding in love. And so you might think of the various stories that even begin the Bible. What does he say to Adam and Eve? That what will happen to them if they eat the fruit from the tree? What does he say? Do you remember?
Do they die?
Yeah. So the language he says
Got it right.
is on the day that you eat it,
Yeah.
you will certainly die.
Yeah.
So they eat the fruit,
Yeah.
and then what does God do? Slay them dead on the spot?
Banish them?
Yeah, so he makes them leave the Garden of Eden,
Yep.
right? He doesn't kill them. There is punishment, but he shows mercy on them. He shows grace in that moment. Or you think about what happens whenever they have kids. Now sin spreads from them to their kids. Firstborn son, Cain, kills his brother. Pretty bad, right? Now, according to the Old Testament law, what should God do? Well, he should kill Cain. It's justice. But that's not what he does. He lets Cain live. He marks him so that other people won't kill him. And I would argue that the Hebrew says he even helps him to build a city for protection. So we see this pattern where there are laws that seem strict. There are some stories, let me be clear, there are some stories that seem harsh. But it seems like the majority of the stories, God leans toward the side of mercy and compassion. Even whenever, according to justice, he shouldn't show mercy and compassion. So, so does God get angry? Absolutely. But I think even in the Old Testament, the picture of God that we see, if we read through the whole thing and we think about it all together, is even then God is really loving and merciful. And so God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. And I would maybe go the other way and say the God of the New Testament, like you said, a couple lies to the apostles, drop dead on the spot, right? Yeah. You also have the book of Revelation where he's like coming on a horse with a sword, and there's some violent imagery there as well. Yeah.
Wow. So, I don't know. Perhaps there are some other problem passages in the Old Testament that kind of brings this tension, right? Like,
can I share one that I would go to?
Yeah.
I'd go to the flood.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions about the flood.
Yeah.
So, okay, first of all, some people think like the flood happened in just one part of the world. It's not really the whole world and all that. I don't know whether we want to get into that, but I think the assumption is he flooded the whole world.
Yeah, I think that the text is describing it as though it's the whole world.
Yeah. So if you want to get into that and I think they can
do their own
discussion,
right?
But we're just going to assume that he did indeed flood the entire world.
Yeah.
Not just a region, not just one nation or one part. That seems extreme. It's like, okay, there's some bad people, let me flood the entire world. So even like animals were not spared.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything's gone.
It's like everything.
Yeah.
That's
extreme. How do we make sense of that?
Yeah.
So what?
And it feels like I don't know how to clearly articulate this.
No, okay. So my worry is like so God promised that He will never flood the world like that again.
Correct.
But He can destroy us some other way.
Some other ways.
So at which point do we anger Him enough to I don't know, open up the whole earth and swallow us up, or send fire or comets? I don't know. Yeah.
Which He does in other passages, right?
So I want to write on that. So God promised Noah, I guess, that after this flood thing, He will not destroy people anymore. And then there's a whole story about His covenant with Israel, and then He start being on Israel's side and fighting against other regions, and that's like a form of destroying other people. So I can't quite make sense of that.
I think also alluding to passages where God seems to have commanded His people to basically perform genocide on other people. Like, just don't spare a single person.
Correct.
Kill them all, even the animals.
Yeah.
So I think, the flood and this...
It's quite a challenging God to follow, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
So let's start with the flood. One of the things that we see is that from the time of Adam and Eve, if you just read from Genesis 3 to Genesis 6, it's trying to tell you things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, right? So much so that whenever you get to the beginning of Genesis 6, this is where the flood begins. The way that it describes humanity is about as negative as you can describe humanity. It says in verse 5, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of humans was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that He had made humans on the earth, and it grieved Him to His heart." So what you see here in these two verses is humanity had become so evil and so corrupted that everything they're doing constantly is evil. Now, we live in an age and we live in a world where because of our understanding of human rights, because of our understanding of, certain ways that we should live in our society, that we just can't imagine a world where everybody's doing evil all the time, continually. And if they were, what would happen to those people today? Like if somebody was doing just pure evil today in Malaysia, what would happen? What would we do to that person?
Punishment by law?
Yeah, which would look like what?
Jail time?
Yeah, jail
Yeah,
them
so like
or
lock up or
cane or
caning or something, right?
Yeah.
So this is a time there are no jails, there are no hospitals to help people to process these types of things, right? And people are doing absolute wickedness to the highest degree. And so we think back through our history, and we can think of some people who have done some really wicked, evil things. Like immediately, who are some people that come to mind that has done some really evil things? Anybody? Who? Huh?
Jolo.
Jolo.
Someone said
Okay,
that.
Jolo. Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
so billions of dollars. Yeah.
Or Hitler.
Hitler. Yeah. I mean, you can think of Stalin. One of the craziest stories was Stalin didn't like the fact that the United States had a lower unemployment percentage. So he sent out his troops to just slaughter anybody who was unemployed and homeless to lower the percentage. I mean, just utter evil. Now, everyone is like that. What's the solution? And so I think what we see here is that God is actually grieved. I mean, we see the depiction of God here that he's at least depicted as feeling emotions. He's grieved. Something has to happen. And what's the solution here? There are no jails. We can't, send people to therapy. And so the solution to save humanity, in a sense, from themselves is the flood. Now, it says Noah and his family are righteous. He doesn't kill them, right? He preserves them and actually preserves them from the wicked and evil people that are all around them. Now, the other thing that's going on in the flood story is that if you read it closely and you think about the earlier chapters of Genesis, it becomes clear. It's almost like a decreation. So like you see the creation in Genesis 1 and 2, and he creates all these things in this order. Genesis 6 to 9 is like backwards. So he gets rid of and destroys all of these things from creation, almost as if it's saying, I'm going to completely purify everything, and I'm going to have this one faithful couple who are going to remain afterwards, and I'm going to continue my loving covenant with them. And so, in fact, whenever it talks about in Genesis 9 with Noah and God's covenant with him, it says he upheld his covenant with him. In other words, it's not a new covenant. He's being faithful to that previous covenant that he had with humans, going back to Adam, but the world needed to be purified. Now, that's why he says that he wouldn't destroy the world with a flood again. It's not just that God is talking about, I'm not going to send a ton of water to destroy things. Because he said, as long as the sun and moon and stars and seasons are functioning, I'm not going to do these things again. So kind of the point that he's making there is, I'm going to maintain the order of the world. I'm not going to decreate things again to purify it in that way again. So fire, comets, any of that, I think would be included in that story, right? Yeah, we're going to be all right. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot there. Yeah.
You mentioned something about God regretted
Yeah.
the creation that He created.
Yeah, I think in
Because-
this translation it said he was sorry.
Sorry.
And it grieved him to his heart.
And these are the and I think this. So he created human beings sin, and they started doing wicked things. God regretted, sent a flood to wipe clean, and then it feels like this whole thing is like a reset to His creation. Like, okay, I'm a gamer.
I think it's told
Yeah.
that way, like it's like a reset. Yeah.
So and this whole reset thing is not just a one-time thing. It feels like there's a lot of reset that happens throughout the Bible. It felt like at the top of my head, He selected Saul to be king of Israel, and then Saul disobeyed God, and over time, he then put David on top, and that feels like a reset towards Israel, the kingship of Israel. And then many other stories that come. I don't know, Jonah's story is probably that. And then now it feels like after reading all this so-called reset button that God pressed, Jesus now becomes a reset button as well.
Are you the type of gamer that, like, if your game's not going well, you just
Yeah.
reset?
I'll do that. I'll
Go back
delete
to
my
the
file and
previous
then
save. Yeah. Okay.
I'll choose to play games now with a different type of lens,
Okay.
hoping that the actions that I do has better consequences.
Okay.
So because I am now playing God in the game,
In
right?
the game. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It does feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a fair observation. Now, I think what we need to realize is that with each reset, what happens on the back end is different. So it's not a fresh, like, start everything over. In Genesis 9, and even at the end of chapter 8, you have Noah and his family after the flood, but notice what it says. I think it's in 8:22. Nope, not in 8:22. 8:21. It says, "And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humans. For the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done." And then he goes on and talks about it. So now in this new situation, you have Adam, who's kind of like the representative, Noah, who's kind of like the representative person, like Adam was, but the situation is different. In the Garden of Eden, Adam wasn't evil from youth, right? Mm-hmm. And he fell into sin. But now we have Noah, who is evil. I mean, in certain inclinations, he was righteous among his generation in comparison to everybody else. But what we're going to see is immediately he's going to fall into sin, right? And so it's a reset, but it's now a different situation. It's not like this is a brand new Eden and we're starting over from there. And then if you think about later, quote unquote, resets, it's refining where the story is focusing on. So now it's saying, even though humans are evil, God is going to preserve his creation. Even though it deserves to be destroyed over and over and over again, if we just go by justice, right? He's going to maintain it to allow the story to continue. And then we're going to see in future stories, so like with Abraham and his family, Abraham is going to do terrible things, right? But God is going to preserve them for the sake of bringing about his ultimate purposes. Even with the kingship of Israel, yes, there are corrupt kings. Yes, the people are unfaithful. Yes, they get sent into exile. But after the reset, all of that is in the background. All of that is now part of the story. And so it's not like you go back to an old save. It's like you go to a reset with all of that happening in the background. So now people know, okay, God, if we do this again, will send us into exile. Our kings were unfaithful. The people were unfaithful. So how? And he sends Jesus. And Jesus is the perfect king. Jesus keeps the law perfectly. And Jesus' story, I would say is less beautiful if you don't have all of those screw-ups beforehand. Does that make sense, what I'm kind of saying?
So that's why we couldn't put Jesus in chapter 1.
Yeah, you can't put
Because
Jesus in
he
chapter
wouldn't-
1. It's like, Adam, you're forgiven for all your sin. What sin? Yeah.
Okay, so we still have the whole genocide thing, but before
Yeah,
that,
we gotta get there.
something just came out. So like the resets, the do-over, different situations, yes, and then so we go all the way back to the flood, and we keep going back because this is going to come up at some point because it all started with the fruit,
Yeah.
right? Eve, Adam, the fruit. Like I'm sure people will ask, like, if God had not put the tree in the garden, there will be no flood. There won't be none of these things.
Yeah.
So if someone does bring that up, because it will get there at some point, how should we process that?
Yeah, so whenever God created Adam, we have to remember from the very beginning, God gave Adam commands. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, work the garden
Yeah.
to protect it, is the language that's used in Genesis 2. So we had these commands for things that he is supposed to do. And in the midst of that, he is supposed to be God's representative over God's kingdom, right? Now, there is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that's there. And God just says to him, don't eat this. On the day that you eat it, you will certainly die, right? So it's not like God is trying to trick him or God is trying to punish him. He's just putting a simple provision in place. Like, if you do this, this is not what you were supposed to do, right? So then, if we go back to the commands that he's supposed to do, he's supposed to guard and protect the garden. I think some translations say that he's supposed to work and till the garden, but the language actually says he's supposed to serve and protect, like a police officer, serve and protect, right? The Garden of Eden. And so in this garden that he's supposed to serve and protect, in comes Satan and starts tempting his wife. Now, if you just read the story, it seems like it's just Eve and Satan that are there, right? And he's like, oh, don't believe God, you're not gonna die, all these different things, right? And so it says that she, for selfish reasons, she saw that the fruit was beautiful, she thought that it had the power to make her wise, she reached out, she took it, she took a bite, and oh, narrative twist, she handed it to the man who was standing there with her. So like Adam, who is supposed to serve and protect this garden and keep it safe, is just standing there passively while all of this is happening. And so it's not just that he ate the fruit from the tree. It's that he was supposed to be God's divine representative who upheld God's law, who protected the garden, who did the things that God was supposed to do, and he failed, right? Now, God in his justice could have killed him on the spot, but he didn't because he's merciful. I would say it's not like, well, why didn't God just not put the tree there? I mean, you can ask all of these types of questions like, why did God create mountains if people could fall off the side of them? Or why would God create oceans if people could drown in them? Or, any of these types of things. God does have purposes that are related to beauty and grandeur and glory and all sorts of things that, because we are limited, frail humans, if we eat something we're not supposed to eat, or if we do something we're not supposed to do, there's going to be consequences. And so I would say it's actually probably a loving command that he says, don't eat from this tree, because the day that you eat of it, you're going to die, right? And we see what happens as a result. It's really bad for everybody involved and all their kids.
I wonder in a parallel universe
Yeah.
if Eve didn't eat a fruit. what would have happened?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So if Eve and Adam would have obeyed God, would not have eaten the fruit, but would have also kept God's other commands, been fruitful, multiplied, filled the earth, and subdued it, if they would have guarded and protected the garden, they would have expanded the Garden of Eden to fill the whole earth. Now notice, there are 2 trees in the garden, right?
Yeah.
What is the one tree that they can't eat from?
Knowledge of good and evil.
Knowledge of good and evil. What's the other tree?
Tree of life.
Tree of life. So they can eat from the tree of life. As long as they are obedient and as long as they are keeping God's covenant, they can eat from the tree of life, live forever, expand the Garden of Eden to cover the whole earth. So if they wouldn't have fallen into sin, then that's what would have happened. But
The life that
as
didn't
humans
happen.
do, yeah,
The story that didn't happen.
the story that didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about the genocide thing? Because like, there are
Yeah.
lots of accusations
Yeah.
in these days. Because
For sure.
they're connecting.
For sure.
Back
That's
to the
right.
Old
I mean,
Testament.
you look at situations that are happening around the world, whether it's South Sudan or Gaza or
Yeah.
other things, and you see where it seems like people are being targeted because of their race.
Yeah.
Right? So genocide, that's what it means. The Greek word genos, the geno part, means race. And so it means killing somebody because they are a particular race. So I think the first thing we would say is what we see in the Old Testament is not genocide in that regard, but it is killing a lot of people that God says to go and kill them. So if we go to, say, the book of Joshua, well, even before then, if we go back to Deuteronomy, where God gives the commands, I believe in Deuteronomy chapter 7, going off the top of my head, so I could be totally wrong here. It says, chapter 7, verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and occupy, and he clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, you then must utterly destroy them. Make no covenant with them, and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, or taking their daughters for your sons. For that would turn away your children from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. And then it says to go about and destroy all of their idolatry, like their various temples and pillars and everything else. So the first thing to note is it says there are these peoples that are living there, and you need to drive them out. Now, historically, this is not a new problem, right? This has been in the Bible since basically the beginning. And so many Christians over many years have struggled with how to handle this. One option, which is an option we would utterly reject, is there was a heretic named Marcion. Marcion said, just cut out the Old Testament. Get rid of it, right? A couple verses are okay. We'll keep those verses, and then we'll keep part of the New Testament. He cut out parts of the New Testament, right? So we don't want to do that. All of Scripture is God-breathed, according to 2 Timothy 3:16. Another option was to say, oh, this is all just a metaphor, right? None of this actually happened, but this is just God telling a story. Well, that doesn't really work either, because that story includes genealogies and historical events that we know happened, right? So that doesn't work. Another option, and even a very famous Christian theologian, St. Augustine, said this. He says, well, God has a certain justice and humans have a different justice. If God says it's okay, well, it's just for God, but that doesn't mean it's just for you. Also not okay. That's really arbitrary, right? Because then it's just like whatever God does, well, that's okay. But that doesn't mean you can do it. I would say there are some fruitful ways to work through this passage and passages like it that at least make it more palatable for people. One is to recognize the focus of Deuteronomy 7, where they're commanded, is not on who they are as a people. It's not on their culture. It's not on anything except their idolatry. That's why it's like you don't marry them, because they'll turn your kids away. Destroy all their temples, their pillars, all of these things. Their idolatry is the main issue here. And throughout the Old Testament, the punishment for idolatry is death. But even then, something that we learn as we study the ancient world and the way that they told these stories is they actually used a lot of hyperbole. So for instance, if I were to say, Chelsea slaughtered Manchester United the other night, does that mean that, Cole Palmer was out there with a machete just slaughtering people on the pitch? No, it doesn't mean that. No. Or if I say, oh man, he just killed that other guy in their boxing match, I don't mean he literally killed him, right? I mean, he won. They use language like that as well. I can give a couple of examples. You can look them up online or whatever. There is a famous monument from Moab. It's King Mesha, Mesha. And King Mesha is talking about his victories. And he goes through this long list and he says, I utterly annihilated the Israelites. I killed Omri, their king. I killed all of them. Their descendants are no more. And then a few lines later, he says, I went to war again with Israel, right? So like at one point he says, killed them all, utterly dead, killed their king. And then a few lines later, he's like, I'm still fighting them. So he's using this hyperbolic language. This was particularly common in the ancient world in passages of judgment. So if you're describing God judging something, they want to give honor and glory to the magnitude of God's judgment, and so they'll describe it in hyperbolic language. So anyone who is reading these things in the Old Testament and comes from that culture is going to assume that this is hyperbole. And there are hints in the text which confirm that. Sometimes it says utterly destroy them, right? But in other passages, it says drive them out before you. Driving someone out is different than utterly destroying them. It will say that, it will say things like, utterly destroy them. They will, in fact, it says it in this passage. It says, utterly destroy them. But then it also says, and don't make a covenant with them and don't intermarry with them. It's really hard to make a covenant with dead people or to marry dead people. It's assuming that some of them are still there in some way. Now, one more factor comes into play, and this is just from archaeology and history, how ancient battles happen. Like today, we can imagine a general who on his phone is like, AI, send a drone, go target that place, over. Not in the ancient world. In the ancient world, you have a massive army that is moving very slowly across usually a plain or up a hill. For days, that they're coming. There are no surprise attacks, right? So whenever an army was coming upon somebody, what they would do is they would tell everybody out in the fields, come into the city, all the men. They would tell the women and the children to go to another place. Sometimes they would send some of the farmers to another place as well. And in the city itself would be soldiers, the king, sometimes priests, and prostitutes. And that's what we read in Joshua. If you think about Jericho, whenever they're going to destroy Jericho, who is there? Soldiers that fight against them and Rahab, a prostitute, right? That's exactly what we would have expected. And we would assume that as the army is coming close, the people who are not combatants have already fled to somewhere else. And a lot of times, whenever that would happen, those people who fled would come back to the conquering army and say, we will worship your God, we will accept your ways. And we see that as well. I mean, think about Rahab. The Bible is not saying you must kill every Canaanite person, because you have Rahab and her family who are like, yes, we will worship the God of Israel. And Rahab is the great-great-great-grandmother of King David, right? So she's pretty important to the story. So I would say, yes, it is hard for us to imagine a world where there is such bloodshed, even between armies like that. Part of that is because we don't quite understand the world at that time. Part of that is because we hide a lot of that from ourselves today. I mean, even if you turn on, whatever news, you don't see much of the violence that is happening. But in that world, in that time, I think that there are ways to understand it where it probably isn't as extreme as we think it is. But I would make one final point. Even if it's not as extreme as we think it is, there were still a lot of people that were killed, and they were killed mainly, we see, for their idolatry. And if you research, go look it up on your own. I'm not going to describe it all here. What Canaanite idolatry looked like, it was evil. It was sacrificing kids. It was all sorts of vicious types of rape and depression, and you can look it up on your own, but it's pretty terrible. And so for God to bring judgment against that is a just thing. Yeah. So hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah. We've got questions from, I guess, as they're listening.
Yeah.
They have some reactions, some response. Should we go into that now?
But just a very quick follow-up on that. So is there a different, because God is also a God who set commandments, right?
Yeah.
The commandment
absolutely.
Being, do not murder.
Yep.
And
it's a good commandment.
War happens and all that, and war happens on behalf of God's army. Is there a different type of standard between the kind of murder and the war kind of killing people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In the Old Testament, there is a difference between murder, which is me taking the life of another person, usually on account of my own will, wanting some type of retribution or vengeance or something, and what we see in war, where it is more like what we see in Joshua and the rest. That's not considered murder. Just like today, it's not considered murder either. If you're in the military, like if you're in the Malaysian army and Malaysia goes to war with, who would Malaysia go to war with? Singapore? I heard like, so I'm assuming that's Singapore. Yeah, so like we're like, let's take Singapore back over, right? That wouldn't be considered murder because it's war, right?
Okay, let's do questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve came up again. So someone asked, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, why doesn't God just forgive them and reset right away? Why? Because the whole of humanity,
Up till
Yes.
today.
yeah,
That's a long time.
That's a long time. Yeah. So I think what's important to see there is immediately in the curses, the first thing I said, God does show them mercy. He doesn't kill them on that day. But even in the curses, in Genesis 3:16, we have the promise of redemption, right? And it's going to be redemption not just for them in that moment, but for any of their descendants. Because now, sin has come into the world. They're going to sin again. Their kids are going to sin. Everybody's going to sin now, right? God could have just forgiven them in that moment, but they're still going to sin again, right? And so what happens is God makes the promise and he says, I will put enmity, strife between you and the woman. He's speaking to the serpent. And between your descendant and hers. He will strike your head and you will strike his heel. Okay? So this kind of weird kind of promise that one of her children, like who knows when, whether it's her first generation or 10,000 generations later, one of her children is going to crush that serpent, Satan. And notice it says he's going to crush his head. So like you crush somebody's head, they're dead. But that Satan is going to crush their heel. There's going to be some suffering that they take on as well. And as we see this promise develop throughout the Old Testament, we see that this is a constant hope of that Redeemer who would come and would not just, forgive the sin of the moment, but would crush Satan. And that's what the New Testament talks about, Christ and the church, even the holding snakes, stepping on scorpions imagery is like this victory over Satan, right?
Yeah.
Jesus crushes the serpent under his feet. So even then, God could have said, you're forgiven right now. And in a sense, he did. He didn't kill them on that day, right? And I think it's a beautiful image. As they become aware of their sin, what do they try to do? They try to hide. They're shameful. They're scared, right? But God just lovingly, where are you? Who told you were naked? He's not just saying, that's it, get over here, you're dead, right? He gives them this opportunity to say, we sinned against you. We did this. We broke your law. And so even in the midst of that, after this happens, what does God do? It says that he clothes them to cover their shame. I think that's a beautiful picture. So he lets them live, he covers their shame, and he promises that one will come who will defeat the serpent who brought this temptation to them. So I think there's a lot of hope and beauty in that story.
Wow.
Okay, I'm just following through other questions.
Yeah.
There's this question that asks about the story of Job. God lets Satan take everything from him just to prove a point. Why would God agree to that kind of test? And if I can just add, since we're talking about Job, it also said that God allows Satan to do some of these things to Job. And in the modern day context, also to answer this question, why does God allow evil to happen, especially to good people? Diseases, pestilence, stuff like that. Yeah.
So let's talk first about Job. And okay, I gotta know. Raise your hand. Who asked Job?
Who asked Job?
Don't be paiseh. It's okay. It's okay. No shame. So I am with you on this one. Job is really tough. I can figure out, the driving out the Canaanites. I can figure out the flood, these types of things. Job is a challenge for me because it says right at the beginning, right? It's like God and his council are up in heaven and Satan comes up to him and is like, let's make a bet, right? And God's like, come on, I'll take you up on that bet. Look at Job. You can't get him to curse me. And so they go into this thing, and I think one of the points of the book is, I think one of the points of the book is Job's friends try to give solutions to why Job is suffering. And they give all the things that we might think of. Oh, God has a greater good in mind. Oh, this is because God has given you free will. Oh, you must be evil and you don't even realize it. All these different things. And the book says, and God says at the end, no, all of the friends were wrong. And so it's like, well, what does that leave you with at the end of the day? God played a bet with Satan, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, so what do we do with this? I think if you get to chapters 38 to 42, if I'm remembering correctly, this is where God speaks directly to Job. And in a sense, what God says is, were you there? Like whenever I created everything? Because at this point, Job is questioning God. He's like, yeah, you shouldn't have done this. Why did you, And so he starts pointing out these things like, I created all this. I know the beginning from the end. I know everything that's going to happen. Are you seriously challenging me? Right? And in a sense, we think, wow, that really puts Job in his place, which is true, right? But you also kind of wonder, isn't Job right to ask God these types of questions in light of this situation? Because his children died, right? Like everybody around him dies, right? The servants even die, right? Now, I think I struggle with it. I understand what the book is trying to say at the end, and I agree with it, right? Yes, God is God. Whatever God decides to do is good. God knows me better than I know myself. He knows my family better than my family knows themselves. If God thinks that it is best, for something terrible to happen to one of my kids, well, he knows, and he's sovereign, right? But at the same time, I'm with whoever asked that question. That Job is a tough one. It's a tough one to figure out. So, yeah.
Wow. We still don't have an answer.
Yeah, so this is something that I think we should recognize. Job is part of a section of the Bible that is called wisdom literature. So Ecclesiastes is also wisdom literature. The Proverbs are also wisdom literature. And the point of these books isn't necessarily to give us a narrative of a historical event. It's not even necessarily to give us like promises of this is how things always happen, but it's to get us to think about what is wise and what is good and how should we live. And so if you think about Job in that way, I think what we do is we think of it as, okay, if this is a historical story and this happened in this way or that way, why would God do that? But I think the point of Job, whether it's historical or not, the point of the book is to get us to think, okay, in light of who God is, how should I live? What does the wise life look like if God is as absolutely sovereign and in control as the book of Job presents him? And then Ecclesiastes is like the other side. Like imagine that like God isn't doing really anything. Everything is just kind of happening. People are doing whatever they want. How should you live? It's kind of like an opposite of Job in a sense. It's kind of like they're in dialogue. Yeah.
Cool.
Where are you now?
No, I'm also thinking, I'm quite disturbed about, okay, actually the way you put it is even more disturbing.
I know.
the whole God and Satan having a bad thing.
Yeah.
But I was initially disturbed on how God allowed all this to happen.
Yeah.
And bringing that to modern day context.
Right.
Where, hey, we serve a great sovereign God and everything around us is still so messed up. So is he allowing this to happen and then
No,
why?
like, so I mean, imagine if you were Job. So Job's right here. Job's the one asking the question.
You're one of the
Right?
three
And
friends.
then like no, or a mom who lost a child.
Yeah.
Or someone who got raped.
Yeah.
Like there's an emotional element there as well. And they're asking the question like, how can you tell me that God is good?
Yeah.
How can I believe in such a God? Like, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, you don't try to give easy answers because there aren't easy answers to that.
Yeah.
But if somebody is coming to you and they're saying, my son was killed or, my sister was raped, I think I might go to a passage like that Genesis 6 passage where I said, whenever people were so evil that they were doing evil things all the time, the way that the Bible describes God is that it grieved him in his heart. God is a God who made laws against these things because they are evil, right? God does not approve of rape or various types of injustice. They are absolutely abhorrent in the Bible. And so I think that's where we have this tension, where on the one hand, so should God just go ahead and destroy all the rapists? But then if we do that, we fall into that other problem that we have. Well, why is God so fierce that he just destroys everybody? Right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that Jesus brings up is, we may not have committed some of those types of sexual sins,
Yeah.
but we've all committed murder in our hearts and sexual sin in our hearts. And honestly, I think most of us would say, if we were in a different situation, we might do evil things too, right? And some of us have done really evil things in the past. And so it's like, would God be just to just wipe us all out? Well, in a sense, yeah, right? But God wants to give people an opportunity to be redeemed. He wants to give people an opportunity to be restored. And that means, at times, living in a world where there is pain, where there are people that continue to do evil, while the message of the gospel comes to them. And while in the midst of this world today, there is evil that is happening all over the Klang Valley right now. But there are also stories of healings and God's mercy and redemption and salvation that are happening all over the Klang Valley right now as well, right? So that really is the tension that we live in.
Yeah. I guess we have to live with the tension, right? How do you feel about that, Kanesh? Are you in tension? You tension now?
I'm in tension. Okay. Let's try to clear some questions.
Maybe you pick one.
Okay, quick fire, all right? So why does God attempted to kill Moses in Exodus 4?
Oh.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Literally quick fire. Okay. Nobody knows?
Nobody knows.
Okay.
Nobody knows.
That's a weird story.
All right.
Every commentary is like, we have ideas, we're not sure. Yeah.
In today's generation, more difficult questions are being asked. As Christian goers, how can we individually be better at equipping ourselves to have conversations, tough conversations? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. I think that there are tough questions that are being asked today. I'm not sure if they're more difficult than any other time in history. One thing that you learn whenever you read Christian scholars from 500, 1,000, 1,500 years ago is they're dealing with the same questions that we're dealing with now. And they're giving, I would say, satisfying answers. Maybe not completely to every question we might have, but I think that they're pushing us in the right direction. So how can you get equipped? Well, praise God, there are plenty of opportunities today. Imagine if you lived 500, 600 years ago, you can't even read, right? And you're having to rely on maybe one person in your village who might know the answers to some of these questions. But you have YouTube, and you have pastors, and you have programs like Explain Apologetics. I mean, if you wanted to, there's a very easy to enter program that's called the Great Commission Apologetics Program that Explain Apologetics does at Malaysia Baptist Theological Seminary. And it goes through these types of questions.
Yeah.
You know, what about the extra books of the Bible? Or, you know, how do we deal with, God allowing evil? Or does God change his mind? And all of these types of things, which are important questions for us to ask. And you have different people who have studied those more in depth who are able to talk through them with you to help you grasp it better. So, I mean, we live in a day and age where there is so much good information that is right there and easy to access.
Yeah, so information is much more accessible now. There's lots of options.
Lots of good programs.
YouTube programs
Yeah.
you can join. And I think that will be the encouragement that as a Christian, we should get ourselves equipped. So my follow-up question then would be, with so much available,
How do you know?
How do we filter? Like, how do we then know which ones are, I guess, legit and which ones are not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really good question as well. Obviously, I think if you were to just look at, say, my YouTube feeds, there are particular people that I follow and I try to see, what they're talking about. And I'm not going to get into who those people are, but I think it's wise to talk to godly Christian friends who maybe have studied these topics more and ask them, say, hey, I'm trying to work through this topic. Who should I be listening to? What book should I read? Are there any podcasts I should listen to? And so on and so forth.
Great.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, next.
You got any more?
If God already knows people will fail, why does he still choose to work with them and get angry when they disobey?
Yeah, I think that God's anger and our anger is really different, like night and day different. So why do I get angry with my kids? Well, I get angry with my kids on the one hand because I love them, but I also get angry with my kids because I'm selfish, right? If my kids come in my office whenever I'm trying to work on something and I get angry at them, it's not their fault. Well, maybe it is, right? But it's really because I'm selfish. A lot of the times whenever I get angry, it's for a variety of reasons that don't apply to God. The reason that God gets angry is because of something that should be punished. God gets angry at sin. God doesn't get angry at righteousness, right? God always responds throughout the entire Bible, Old Testament to New Testament. God always responds to repentance with mercy. He always, every single time, Old Testament, New Testament, responds to rebellion with judgment, right? And so God's anger is against people or things that are happening that go against the good ways that he has intended for the world. So if God is getting angry at something, it's not like he's just being petty or there are good reasons behind his anger. Not like my reasons. My reasons are usually just petty.
Okay. I think there's no more questions on Slido, but I'll probably add one.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, or do you think that Adam was created in a way where he is set up for failure? And I also say that because maybe there are other ways to look at it, but one way to look at it is because Adam was also created in the image of God, who can be angry, jealous, and have some traits. And therefore, in a way, or maybe through like a DNA kind of a way that gives
Yeah.
him certain form of curiosity and then do the fruit thingy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a really interesting argument by St. Augustine made 1600 years ago, where St. Augustine is talking about whenever Adam was created, no matter what God creates or who God creates, whatever God creates is less than God. Only God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, all of these things. So whatever God creates will by necessity be less than God. And so he created Adam in his image as the pinnacle of his creation. But as humans, we know we are not all-knowing. We are not all-loving. We are not all-powerful. We have all sorts of limitations because we are not God. And so by virtue of our nature, we would naturally lead to situations where, if tempted, we will fail. Now, Augustine, I think, maybe tries to justify Adam by saying, oh, well, he just didn't know better, right? No, Adam knew better, right? Eve knew better. It says it very clearly that she saw that the fruit was appealing, had the power to make her wise, and so on and so forth. But I do think that there's something to recognizing because we are not God, we are therefore, by definition, imperfect. And if given the opportunity to sin, will. So I think that God knew that Adam was going to sin. God wasn't surprised by it, right? God isn't surprised. And that's why from the very beginning, God promises redemption. It actually says later on in the New Testament that before the ages began, God had made a covenant. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit had a covenant to redeem humanity through the work of Christ. So Jesus' redemption, Jesus' salvation is like plan A. And for plan A to happen, that means, yeah, Adam's going to mess up. God knew that. Yeah.
So I think we have time for one last question, perhaps. I think we brought a lot of different concepts today as well, like God is all-knowing, all-loving. And I think if someone's out there and they are curious and they're trying to find answers, I think some of these things need to be defined. Like, what does it mean by God's all-knowing? Because if we don't define that, we get into those types of like dead ends. Like, oh, if he's all-knowing and he knew Adam's going to do it, but he still allowed it to happen. If God's all good, and how can he, you know what I mean? So I think there is a need for those who are genuinely searching and wanting to know, to find ways. And like we said earlier, there are resources, there are programs to go and seek out answers for those type of questions. Right? So let's do that. We encourage you to do that. Perhaps my last question would be, perhaps a more pastoral, more applicable one would be, say, if I am one who's struggling, say something happened in my life, I had a loss or some injustice happened, and I'm struggling. I could be Christian or not a Christian, I think it doesn't matter, but I'm struggling to believe in God or to believe in goodness. What would you recommend to me as perhaps step 1, step 2, step 3 to deal with this?
Yeah, so I would just say from my own personal experience,
Yeah.
Whenever I went through that really strong dark night of the soul type period, what mattered to me was knowing, like not giving up on the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. And if Jesus rose from the dead, then I can figure out the rest of it, right? The rest of it will fall into place. So step 1 was just continuing to remember Jesus rose from the dead, and I can trust him. Even if I can't figure out this passage, or I can't figure out that passage, or this theology problem is really tough, or I can't reconcile why bad things seem to be happening in my life. If I can trust in Jesus, that's all that's necessary for salvation, right? And then I think step 2 is recognizing that it's okay to ask questions. Like, if you read the Bible, I mean, think about Jesus on the cross. What does he do? He quotes Psalm 22. He asks a question, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
Like, are you bold enough to pray that to God? And Jesus himself is praying it on the cross. And so that tells me that God is okay with us bringing these emotions and these questions to him in this very bold manner. God is not afraid of questions. And then I would say, if you do run into a pastor or a church leader who says, man, don't ask questions, just have faith. Okay, they probably love you deeply, and they probably they want you to just press on and have faith, but keep looking. I assure you, at this point, there have been departments of Bible and theology at all of the top universities across the world for hundreds of years. Every question has been asked, and at every one of those universities, there are still passionate evangelical believers who know and love Jesus, have asked these questions, maybe been through their own period of deconstruction, and come out faithful on the other side. So just keep trusting Jesus. Know it's okay to ask the questions. Keep looking for the answers, and God will be faithful. Or at least, that's my story.
Well, that's all for now. We hope you've been inspired and impacted by the content today. If you have been blessed by what you've experienced, well, you know what to do. Please like, subscribe, and share it with your family and friends. We love hearing from you, so please comment and do share your feedback, thoughts, or even questions and content ideas. Search, follow, or tag us on social media at Generations Mind. For more information, check out bit.ly/generationsmind. Until next time, God bless.